Hey, I'm Miss Hughes. I'm a high school English teacher from North Carolina, and we're going to be talking about rhetorical moves today. Now, you should already know about rhetorical appeals, which would be like ethos, pathos, and logos. If you don't know about those, then I'm going to suggest you go watch that video first. I will link it down below. But we're going to be talking about rhetorical moves. Another way to say this would be like rhetorical devices, and let's talk about how they're different. So rhetorical moves are strategies that speakers use to advance their argument or their claim. So they're using it to get their point across. They also will use them to strengthen how persuasive their argument or claim really is, because we want to win our arguments. And rhetorical moves can help people do that. There are a ton of rhetorical moves. We are only going to talk about a few. I am going to tell you the definition of the rhetorical move, and then I am going to tell you an example from a speech that you can use to help you remember what it actually means. Are you ready? Let's get started. So let's get started talking about rhetorical moves. These are different than rhetorical appeals. They are strategies that we use to advance your argument or to strengthen your persuasive appeal, and we're only going to talk about a few. There are actually a lot more than we will be discussing. So the first one we're going to talk about is adjectives. And adjectives are descriptive words that we use to add emphasis and to create an emotional response from someone. A lot of times adjectives have a connotation behind them, which we'll also talk about that word in a little bit as well. For instance, in a coronavirus press conference recently, Donald Trump said in response to a reporter, "That's a nasty, snarky question." And those adjectives definitely add emphasis and created an emotional response, especially if you were the reporter that was being said to. Alliteration is when we repeat initial consonant sounds. So that means the first letter of a couple of words in a sentence. And we do that so that we emphasize those words and make it more memorable. So notice how even saying more memorable has alliteration in it. All of the words do not necessarily have to be beside each other in order for it to be alliteration. So in one of the Austin Powers movies, he says, "Isn't that what being an international man of mystery is all about?" It's a lot easier for us to remember man of mystery because the M and the M. If we said he was an international guy of mystery, it wouldn't be as memorable. Then we have anecdotes. Anecdotes are short, personal stories that we use to connect with our audience. They also can add evidence or credibility to an argument. You will see this a lot when people are giving speeches. They will stop in the middle of what they are saying to tell a little story, and it's in order for you to like them or to show that they have expertise in a certain area. So, for example, in one of the Harry Potter novels, Dumbledore says, "Oh, I would never dream of assuming I know all of Hogwarts' secrets. Only this morning, for instance, I took a wrong turn on the way to the bathroom and found myself in a beautifully proportioned room I had never seen before." So, Dumbledore is adding an example of how he does not know all of Hogwarts' secrets. He could have just said, "I would never dream of assuming I know all of Hogwarts' secrets," but by adding that little anecdote onto it, it makes it so that he is more believable. He's giving evidence to back up what he's saying, and also it makes his story a little bit more interesting. Then we have assertion. Assertion is essentially when you have an idea that I'm going to tell you it's a fact, but I'm not really going to explain how I know that it's a fact or give you evidence to prove that it is. A lot of people will use assertions to show that they're in charge, they're an authority. And also when they need to make claims sound factual when they might know in reality that they're not. So for instance, in Othello, which is a play, Desdemona says, "I never did offend you in my life. I never loved Cassio, but with such general warranty of heaven as I might love, I never gave him token." So she's not actually going to prove to us that she didn't love Cassio. She's just saying, here's the deal. I didn't love him. And she doesn't feel like she needs to back it up with an explanation or evidence. She's just saying, this is the truth. Then we have attacks. Attacks is one of the rhetorical moves that you will see used the most in life. And it's when a speaker addresses the other side of the argument, so the opposing view, or another speaker, and attacks either what they're trying to say, so their argument, or their character, so them as a person. For instance, in the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, Homer Stokes, who's a politician, says, "Look, I happen to know, ladies and gentlemen, that this band of miscreants here this very evening interfered with the lynch mob in the performance of its duty." So essentially, he is trying to make the Soggy Bottom Boys look bad by calling them a band of miscreants. So that would be an attack. We see attacks used a lot in politics when someone is trying to make the other side or the other candidate look bad. Then we have bias. Bias is when someone presents only one side of an issue or viewpoint, and they use that to influence their audience. For instance, for a long time, people have said that autism is caused by childhood vaccinations. And this started being published in 1998. If we know that this is actually unsupported, but someone brings it up anyway, then they are showing their bias on this subject. Connotation. Connotation is when ideas or feelings come from a certain word. So if a word creates an emotional response in an audience, one thing I like to think about, I am from the South, but the idea of apple pie definitely has a connotation behind it. People think about it being warm and loving, and that's just a connotation. Another example would be the words cheap versus affordable. If I say something is cheap, it makes it sound like it's not well made or it's not a good value, like it's trash, it's cheap. But if I say something is affordable, it makes it sound like, oh, this is a good price. The item is probably quality, whereas cheap sounds more like trash. Notice though that cheap and affordable technically mean the same thing, that something doesn't cost a lot, but the specific words have a connotation behind them. Exaggeration is when we show something as greater than it actually is, or if we need to grab the attention of the audience and emphasize certain points. So FDR, when he did his first inaugural address, said, "So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Do you think the only thing we have to fear is actually fear? Probably not. There's a lot of things in life to be scared of. So this would be an exaggeration, but he uses it to grab our attention and get his point across. Figurative language. Figurative language is something you've probably heard of before. Maybe you've heard of it as a literary device. There are tons of them. They are used to create imagery and express something non-literally, so figuratively. It can make something more vivid, more convincing, have more emotion behind it, and the imagery helps us to actually picture what the person is saying. There's a ton of different examples of figurative language, like metaphors and similes, but one example we have here is from Frozen, when Elsa says the wind is howling like this swirling storm inside, and it helps you to picture what's actually happening both on the outside and on her insides. Generalization is when you infer that something is true for most people or a majority of people. To infer something is, again, to kind of make like an educated guess. And we use this to talk about beliefs or prejudices that we have of a whole audience. So for instance, in The Pursuit of Happiness, when Chris Gardner says, "Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something," that would be a generalization. Are there some times where you can't do something? Yes, but he makes that generalization. Another common generalization people make is when they say, "Everybody does blah, blah, blah," or "Nobody believes blah, blah, blah." Trust me, there's always somebody who does or doesn't. Jargon is when we use specific words or expressions that are used by a certain profession or a certain group of people in order to show that I'm an expert and I have credibility or I know what I'm talking about. So you can hear this in pretty much every single group of people in the world, or every single profession would have jargon used by that group. For instance, Gloria Acolytis, who is in charge of the ER unit on the show Nurse Jackie, if she talks about comas and negative malfeasance, then that would be a sign that she is using medical jargon. If I, as a teacher, started talking about PDPs and PLCs, then that is jargon that would be used by teachers. Loaded words are words that are almost charged so that they're electric, meaning they have some kind of underlying meaning or implication that will produce some kind of emotion in an audience. For instance, we have the words anti-abortion and pro-life. Now, both of these words mean the same thing, but depending on who's talking, they may choose which one they want to use. For instance, if I say anti-abortion, I might use that to negatively describe someone who's against abortion. Whereas if I wanted to say someone is pro-life, then I could use that to positively describe somebody who's against abortion. Notice that one sounds a lot more negative than the other one, with the words anti and pro in front. Pronouns are words that take the place of nouns, and we use them to create unity with our audience or to distance from a common enemy. And the most common use of these would be the words we. So for instance, in the Declaration of Independence, we say, we the people, and it makes it feel like you are included. Whereas if I was talking about a nation that we were going to war with, if I wanted to distance, I might say them. And it makes it sound different when you say we versus them. Repetition is when we see certain words or phrases happen multiple times within a speech. And it's used to emphasize certain ideas and make them more memorable. For instance, in Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, he says, I have a dream many, many times throughout the speech, which is one of the reasons why it's so memorable and also why it's named the I Have a Dream speech. That was the main idea that he wanted his listeners to take away from his speech, which is why he chose to include that phrase so many times. Rhetorical questions are statements which we say as a question, but we don't actually expect anyone to answer them. We use that to imply a certain answer and also to make the audience think a certain way. So for instance, in Sojourner Truth's speech, she keeps asking the question, and ain't I a woman? She is a woman. She doesn't actually need anyone to answer the question. She just wants them to think in their mind, yes, of course you're a woman. And that's the point she's trying to get across. Parents love to use rhetorical questions when they talk to their kids. Think about a time where your parents have asked a question that they don't actually want you to answer. They just want you to think in your brain what the answer would be. And then we have rule of three. So rule of three is when we use three adjectives or three phrases in order to make an idea memorable. So for instance, in Jesse Jackson's Democratic National Convention address, he said, we must expand our party, heal our party, and unify our party. Now, he could have just said one of these, but instead he says three because he keeps saying our party. Notice here when he also says our, that's another use of pronouns. It makes it feel like you're included. Now, like I said in the beginning, there are actually a ton more rhetorical moves than the ones we talked about. So if you would like to learn some more, you can look them up and see if there are any other ones that may be helpful for you. These are the ones that I want my students to know. And they are the ones that, to me, are some of the easier ones to notice kind of out in the wild. So try to be on the lookout for these rhetorical moves when you hear people talking, especially in things like commercials or movies or TV shows or even out in real life. See if you can identify people using these. I promise you, you will start to hear them if you look for them. I'll see you again soon. Bye.